It was a quiet evening when Claire's world came crashing down. The kind of evening where the world outside seemed to be moving in slow motion, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. The air was still and warm, but within the confines of her apartment, Claire's heart was pounding as if it were racing against the clock. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands resting nervously on her swollen belly, her breath shallow. Her phone vibrated on the coffee table, and she froze. The name on the screen was unmistakable, John. For a moment, she thought about ignoring it. Maybe he was calling to apologize, maybe to say he'd made a mistake, that he still loved her. That this whole mess was just a misunderstanding. But deep down, Claire knew better. She knew this call wasn't going to be about love. Not anymore. Taking a deep breath, she picked up the phone. The seconds felt like hours as she stared at the screen, willing herself to pick it up. Her finger hovered over the green button. Just the sound of his voice, even after everything, made her stomach twist in ways she couldn't explain. She pressed it, and the call connected with a soft click. Claire, John's voice came through the speaker, but it wasn't the voice she remembered. It wasn't warm or comforting. It was cold, distant. It had been like that for weeks, but now it was unmistakable. He had already checked out of their marriage. The words tumbled out of his mouth, slow but precise, as if he'd practiced them over and over in his head before making the call. Claire, it's over. I'm leaving. She blinked, the words seeming to take a moment to register. She could feel the air around her growing thicker, suffocating her, as if the walls of the room had suddenly closed in. She couldn't speak. Her lips felt numb, her thoughts scattered. I don't understand, she whispered, hoping that somehow this wasn't real. This couldn't be happening. Not like this. There was a long pause, and Claire heard him shuffle around, the muffled sounds of what could have been a car in the background. He was on the move. The finality of his tone was unmistakable. I'm sorry, Claire. I've met someone else. I've been seeing her for a while now. His words hit her like a cold slap, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. Someone else, she repeated, barely able to process the words. How long? A few months now, he said, his voice a bit softer but still firm. I didn't want to hurt you, but I don't think I can keep living this lie. A few months. The thought of it made Claire feel sick. She closed her eyes and gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles turning white. She could feel the bile rising in her throat. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be real. He went on, but Claire wasn't listening anymore. She was drowning in the flood of emotions that had consumed her, shock, disbelief, anger, and a deep, aching sorrow that made it hard to breathe. Everything she thought she knew about her life, her marriage, her future, it was all falling apart in a matter of seconds. The life they had built together, the dreams they had shared, it was all vanishing like smoke in the wind. I didn't want to do this over the phone, John continued, his voice now wavering. But I don't know how else to say it. I'm leaving, Claire. I'm moving in with her. It's done. The finality of his words felt like a punch to her gut. Claire's hand flew to her stomach instinctively, as if protecting the child growing inside of her from the harshness of the world. She couldn't think straight. Her mind was racing, her thoughts scattered. How could he? How could he just leave like that? She had trusted him. She had loved him. And now he was gone, without so much as a second thought. For a moment, she wanted to scream, to tell him how much he had destroyed her. How could he do this to her, especially now, when she was pregnant? How could he abandon their child before it was even born? But all she could manage was a broken whisper. Please, John. Don't do this. I'm sorry, Claire, he said, his voice almost too quiet now. I really am. But this is what's best for both of us. Before she could reply, the line went dead. He had hung up. Claire dropped the phone onto the couch beside her, her hands trembling. The silence in the room was suffocating, deafening. Her vision blurred as tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her view of the empty room around her. She reached out, gripping the armrest, as if the act of holding on to something could keep her grounded in the storm of emotions crashing through her. How had they gone from forever to this? How had she gone from the woman who had stood at the altar, vows of eternal love in her heart, to a woman left alone, abandoned by the one person she thought would never leave her? Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as Claire sat in a daze. She had no idea how long she'd been sitting there, lost in the tumult of emotions that had overtaken her. The reality of what had just happened hadn't quite sunk in. She kept replaying his words over and over in her head, trying to make sense of it all. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't make it fit. Her phone buzzed again, but she didn't move to pick it up. It wasn't him. It wouldn't be. The next few days were a blur. Claire found herself moving through life in a haze, as if everything around her was happening in slow motion. She went through the motions, eating, sleeping, and somehow managing to get through the day, but nothing felt real anymore. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and empty. John's things were gone, but his absence seemed to hang in the air, a constant reminder of the betrayal she was still trying to wrap her head around. It wasn't until one Sunday afternoon, 2 weeks after the phone call, that Claire would find the thing that would unravel her even further. She had been trying to distract herself, scrolling through social media, mindlessly, almost out of habit, when she saw it. A photo. At first, she didn't even understand what she was looking at. It was a picture of John, standing in a cafe, smiling. His arm was around a woman's shoulder, and they were both looking at the camera with that easy, intimate smile that only a couple who were deeply in love could have. Claire's heart skipped a beat. She didn't need to read the caption to know what it was. But she did, and when she did, everything inside her froze. Celebrating 6 months with the love of my life. 6 months? The woman in the photo had been in his life for half a year, and Claire had been none the wiser. Every time he had been working late or out of town, he had been with her. Every single moment he had promised her that everything was fine, that things were going great, had been a lie. The anger surged in Claire's chest like a wave. She wanted to throw the phone across the room, wanted to scream at the top of her lungs. But all she could do was stare at the picture, at the woman who seemed so effortlessly beautiful, at the woman who had taken her place. The woman in the picture was everything Claire wasn't. She was everything Claire feared she would never be. She had the kind of smile that spoke of a carefree life, a life that wasn't weighed down by the struggles of pregnancy and the complexities of a failed marriage. She was free, free of the responsibilities, free of the heartache, free of the man who had once vowed to stand by her side forever. For a long time, Claire just stared at the screen, her eyes hot with unshed tears, her heart breaking all over again. She didn't know how long she sat there, her fingers gripping the phone so tightly her hand began to ache. It was as if the photo, the woman, the lies, it all came crashing down around her. She felt something snap inside her. The days after the phone call had passed in a blur of emotions that Claire could barely keep up with. Each day felt like a slow drag, one where time seemed to stand still as she wrestled with her grief and confusion. She went through the motions, waking up to a world that felt foreign and cold, her body heavy with the burden of carrying not just her child, but the pain of a broken heart. John's absence, although physically present in the empty space of their apartment, was also emotionally suffocating, hanging over her like a dark cloud that never seemed to lift. Her mind was constantly consumed by the image of John with another woman. The picture was burned into her memory, haunting her whenever her thoughts wandered. She tried to block it out, tried to tell herself that it didn't matter, that he wasn't worth her pain. But the reality was that everything in her life had changed in an instant. The man she had trusted with her future, the man she had loved unconditionally, had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way. He had left her for someone else, and the worst part was that he had been hiding it all along. The betrayal stung deeper every time she allowed herself to dwell on it. But the anger, the bitterness, that had once consumed her was slowly being replaced by something much more unsettling, a desire for answers. Claire wasn't the kind of person to let things slide. She needed to know the truth, the full truth, no matter how painful it would be. It was the only way she could start to heal, the only way she could ever hope to move forward. So, she began searching. It wasn't like Claire hadn't already tried to reach out to John in the days following his departure. She had called, sent text messages, and even left a few voicemails, hoping for some sort of closure, some explanation for why he had left her so abruptly. But John had made it clear, he was done. Every message was met with silence, each attempt at reaching him only confirming that his decision was final. But Claire couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more. That there was something hidden beneath the surface of his actions, something she wasn't seeing. The mystery of why John had left her, why he had betrayed her in such a cold, calculated way, lingered in her mind like an itch she couldn't scratch. One afternoon, after a particularly sleepless night, Claire found herself sitting at her kitchen table with her laptop open in front of her. She was staring at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keys, unsure of where to begin. She had already looked through John's social media pages, but there was nothing new there. His posts were sparse, his updates vague, nothing that gave away any hints as to what he was doing or why he had left her. But Claire wasn't looking for something obvious. She wasn't searching for some grand revelation. What she wanted were the small pieces, the hidden messages, the things John had neglected to mention. If she could just find that one detail, that one clue that would make everything make sense, maybe then she could start to understand the full scope of what had happened. Her fingers began typing as her mind raced, her eyes scanning the screen for anything that might offer some answers. She started small, searching for mentions of the woman in the picture. The woman who had been celebrating 6 months with John. Her name, if Claire could find it, might be the key to unlocking the mystery. But as Claire clicked through various links and websites, her eyes kept flicking back to the image of the woman, her smile, her confidence, everything Claire wished she could be. It wasn't long before Claire's search led her down a path she hadn't expected. After a few hours of digging, she stumbled upon an article, one that seemed unrelated at first, but upon reading the headline, Claire's heart skipped a beat. The title read, "Local Businesswoman Accused of Fraud and Embezzlement." The name at the center of the scandal caught her eye instantly, Megan Harris. Claire's stomach churned as she clicked the link, her fingers trembling. She had seen that name before. It was the same woman in the picture with John. The very same. Her face was unmistakable. Megan Harris. The businesswoman. The mistress. The article detailed a growing scandal surrounding a successful, but now disgraced, businesswoman in their city. Megan had been the owner of a well-known luxury real estate firm, one that had built a reputation for catering to the city's wealthiest clientele. However, the article went on to explain that Megan had recently come under investigation for a string of financial misdeeds, including embezzling funds and committing tax fraud. Claire's mind was spinning. She had never suspected that John's new partner could be involved in something so dark. Megan Harris was a name Claire had never paid much attention to before. To her, she was just a pretty face, someone who had taken her husband. But now, it seemed, there was much more to Megan's story than Claire could have ever imagined. The article mentioned that the authorities had been tracking Megan's financial dealings for months, but the investigation had recently taken a more serious turn. Claire read every word with growing disbelief. The woman who had stolen her husband's heart was embroiled in a web of criminal activity. Claire's mind reeled as she wondered just how deep this rabbit hole went. Had John known about Megan's illicit activities? Or had he been caught up in the allure of her beauty, her charm, her success? Could this be the reason he had left Claire so suddenly? Was he in trouble himself, tangled up in Megan's mess? Her head was spinning with questions, but there was one thing Claire knew for certain: this wasn't just a story of a man leaving his wife for another woman. This was bigger than that. This was something far darker, something that threatened to unravel the carefully constructed life John and Claire had built together. The more Claire dug into Megan's life, the more she uncovered. She discovered a series of articles detailing Megan's rise to fame and fortune in the real estate world. She was a self-made woman, driven by ambition, but with a dark side that had started to surface only recently. It seemed that Megan's charm had been a cover for her manipulative tendencies. Her business dealings had been questioned for years, but it wasn't until recently that the authorities had gathered enough evidence to launch a full investigation. Claire continued reading, each new revelation sending her into a deeper spiral of disbelief. She learned that Megan had been involved in several high-profile business ventures, all of which had fallen apart under suspicious circumstances. Properties had been mismanaged, investors had been left with nothing, and clients who had once trusted her had begun to speak out. But no one had connected the dots, until now. What caught Claire's attention the most, however, was a small, seemingly insignificant detail buried deep in one of the articles. Megan's firm had recently filed for bankruptcy, and a few days later, Megan had mysteriously disappeared. Her name had been all over the news in the weeks before Claire's discovery, but the authorities hadn't been able to track her down. Megan had vanished into thin air, and no one knew where she had gone. Suddenly, it clicked. Megan hadn't just come into John's life out of nowhere. She had been the catalyst for something much bigger. And John, whether he realized it or not, had gotten himself caught up in a mess he couldn't get out of. But why? Why had he stayed with her even after everything had started to fall apart? Had he known the truth? Or was he as much a victim as Claire had been? Her heart raced as she sat back in her chair, her mind filled with too many questions and not enough answers. She had to find out more. She had to know the full truth, no matter what it took. As she began searching for any connections between John and Megan's disappearing act, Claire felt a familiar sense of dread settle in her stomach. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about survival. And she had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went. Claire sat at her desk in the dimly lit apartment, the shadows of the evening creeping across the walls as the weight of the last few days pressed down on her. Her laptop screen glowed faintly in the dark, casting an eerie light on her face. The search for answers had consumed her, and now, the truth she had uncovered felt like a jigsaw puzzle, its pieces scattered in front of her, impossible to put together. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't walk away until she knew everything. Her phone buzzed on the desk beside her, interrupting her thoughts. For a moment, Claire almost ignored it. She had become numb to calls and messages, most of them from concerned friends or family who had noticed her sudden detachment from the world. But when she saw the name on the screen, Sarah, her closest friend, Claire hesitated before picking up. "Hey, Claire," Sarah's voice came through the speaker, warm but laced with concern. "How are you doing? I've been trying to reach you." "I'm fine," Claire replied quickly, too quickly, her voice betraying the lie. She tried to sound casual, but the effort was draining. "Just been busy." "Busy? With what, exactly?" Sarah pressed, sensing something was off. "You haven't been yourself lately. Is everything okay?" Claire hesitated. She had told Sarah bits and pieces of what had happened, how John had left her, how the pain had consumed her. But she had kept the rest of the story to herself. The deeper truths she had uncovered, the things about Megan and John's betrayal, it was all too much to share. She wasn't ready to talk about it. I'm dealing with things," Claire finally said, her voice quieter now. "But I don't want to get into it right now." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You know you can talk to me, right? About anything." "I know, Sarah," Claire murmured, her throat tight. "I just need some space." The silence stretched on, the weight of her words hanging between them. Finally, Sarah sighed. "All right, just know I'm here for you. You're not alone in this, okay?" Claire blinked away the tears that had begun to well up in her eyes, pushing them back with a strength she didn't even know she had. "Thanks," she whispered, barely able to speak. After a few more moments of awkward silence, Claire ended the call, feeling more isolated than ever. She had always been able to rely on Sarah, but tonight, even her best friend couldn't help her. The feeling of loneliness and betrayal was suffocating. She turned back to the laptop and began scrolling through the endless web of articles, news stories, and financial records she had unearthed. It was all pointing toward one thing: Megan Harris wasn't just a mistress. She was a woman in hiding. A woman who had vanished after committing a series of crimes that threatened to destroy everything in her path. But what was her connection to John? What had he gotten himself into? Claire's fingers hovered over the keys as she continued to piece together the puzzle. It wasn't long before she came across a blog post, one that made her heart race. The post was from a small-time journalist who had been investigating the case of Megan Harris for months. The journalist had been tracking the businesswoman's movements, attempting to uncover the full extent of her criminal activity, and it seemed that the woman's disappearance wasn't as accidental as it had seemed. The blog post outlined a theory that Megan had staged her own disappearance, possibly with the help of someone on the inside. There were rumors that Megan had been involved in a much larger operation, one that extended far beyond her real estate empire. The blogger speculated that she had connections to organized crime, possibly even money laundering. But the most chilling part of the post came toward the end, when the journalist mentioned an odd detail that made Claire's blood run cold. The blog post referenced a mysterious benefactor who had been funding Megan's lavish lifestyle in the months before her disappearance. The journalist suggested that this benefactor might have been someone close to Megan, someone who had the power to shield her from the authorities and keep her under the radar. The name of this benefactor was never revealed. But Claire had a sinking feeling that she knew exactly who it was. John. It made sense. John had always been a successful businessman in his own right. He had a reputation for making lucrative deals, always with the right people in the right places. Could it be that John, for all his charm and ambition, had gotten himself caught up in something far more dangerous than he ever imagined? Had he helped Megan? Was he complicit in whatever she had been doing behind the scenes? The more Claire thought about it, the more the pieces seemed to fit together. The suddenness of John's departure. His unwillingness to talk about the details. The way he had been acting distant long before he left, was it all a sign that something much darker had been at play? Her heart pounded in her chest. If John had been involved in something criminal, then what did that mean for their child? Could he have been using their marriage as a cover for his dealings with Megan? And if he had been involved in money laundering or some other illicit activity, was he in danger? Had he left because he feared for his life? Or had he simply walked away from Claire and their unborn child to escape the consequences of his actions? Claire's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each more disturbing than the last. She couldn't stay idle anymore. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. Her desperation grew, pushing her to make decisions she would have never considered just a few weeks ago. The next morning, Claire stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. Her face was pale, her eyes tired, but there was something different in her expression now. There was resolve. The days of sitting idly by, waiting for answers to fall into her lap, were over. She had to confront John. She had to find him, whether he wanted to be found or not. She picked up her phone and began scrolling through the contacts in her address book. There was only one person who could help her now, someone who had the connections and the know-how to dig deeper into the world John and Megan had been hiding from her. Her heart raced as she dialed the number. "Hello?" came a voice on the other end of the line. "It's Claire," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves building inside her. "I need your help." An hour later, Claire found herself sitting in a dimly lit cafe on the corner of the street, waiting for a man she hadn't seen in years. His name was Nathan, and he had been an old friend of John's, a former business associate who had vanished from their lives after a fallout several years ago. Nathan had always been a bit of a mystery to Claire, but she knew one thing for sure: if anyone could help her track down John and uncover the truth, it was him. Nathan slid into the seat across from her, his eyes scanning her face before he spoke. "You look like hell," he said bluntly, his voice low. "Nice to see you too," Claire replied dryly. Her heart was pounding in her chest. She had no idea what Nathan knew, or how much he was willing to tell her, but she knew this was the only shot she had at getting answers. "I heard about John," Nathan said, his voice more serious now. "What's going on, Claire? You know this isn't just about a broken marriage. There's more to this, isn't there?" Claire leaned forward, her hands trembling slightly as she folded them on the table. "I think John's in deeper than we ever realized. There's something going on with Megan Harris. Something criminal." Nathan's gaze darkened. "I figured as much. You're not the first person to get caught up in her web, Claire. But this is bigger than you think. If you really want answers, you're going to need to dig deeper. But be careful. Some things aren't meant to be uncovered." Claire's heart skipped a beat. She had been prepared for something, but not for this. What was Nathan saying? What had John gotten himself into? But before she could ask any more questions, Nathan stood up abruptly. "You're not ready for the full truth," he said cryptically. "But I'll help you find John. You just need to be prepared for what you're going to learn. It won't be easy." Claire's breath hitched as she stood to leave, but Nathan stopped her with a single word. "Don't trust everyone, Claire. Especially not John. He's not the man you think he is." And with that, he walked away, leaving Claire with more questions than answers. Claire couldn't stop thinking about Nathan's words. He had left her with an unsettling feeling, something she couldn't shake. Don't trust everyone, Claire. Especially not John. The words echoed in her mind as she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. She had thought that John was just a man who had made a mistake, a man who had let his emotions get the better of him. But Nathan's warning made her question everything she thought she knew about him. Was John really the man she had believed him to be? Or had he been hiding something far darker all along? The next morning, Claire woke up with a single thought on her mind: she had to find John. Not just for the answers, but for her own peace of mind. She couldn't go on living in this state of uncertainty. Every passing day felt like a weight dragging her down further. She quickly showered, dressed, and made herself a cup of coffee, the bitter taste of it grounding her as she tried to collect her thoughts. The more she reflected on her conversation with Nathan, the more she realized how little she actually knew about John's life. They had shared years together, built a future, a family, yet she had never truly known the full extent of his world. That thought unsettled her. Was it possible that she had been blind to the signs of who John really was? Had she overlooked the cracks in their relationship, the subtle hints of something amiss, only to be blinded by her own trust in him? The phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her thoughts. This time, it was a message from Sarah, asking how Claire was doing. Claire's heart clenched. Sarah had been there for her when no one else had, but right now, she felt like there was no one who truly understood what she was going through. The distance she felt with everyone was suffocating. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment, but instead of replying, she pushed the phone aside and got up from the table. She needed to do this on her own. Claire's first stop was the last place she had seen John, their old apartment. It had been over a week since he had left, and the place felt eerily empty without him. She hesitated for a moment at the door, her hand resting on the doorknob, as if the very act of opening it would somehow shatter the fragile illusion of peace she had built in her mind. But she couldn't wait any longer. She had to see if there was anything, that might give her a clue about where John had gone, or what he had been hiding from her. The apartment was just as she had left it, the remnants of their life together scattered throughout the rooms like echoes of the past. There were pictures of their trips together, their wedding day, the first ultrasound of their child. She couldn't bring herself to take them down. They were a reminder of a life that no longer existed, a life that had been torn apart by betrayal. Claire walked through the rooms slowly, trying to steady her breathing, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in her chest. Her eyes scanned every surface, nothing out of place. But then, in the bedroom, she saw something that made her stop dead in her tracks. A small envelope lay on the bed, half hidden beneath the pillows. It was addressed to her, in John's handwriting. Her heart raced as she picked it up, the weight of it feeling much heavier than it should. She stared at the envelope for a long time, her mind racing with possibilities. What could he have written? Was it an apology? An explanation? Or was it something darker? With trembling hands, Claire opened the envelope. Inside, there was a single piece of paper, folded neatly. She unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the words. Claire. I'm sorry for everything. I know this will never make sense, but I need you to know that leaving wasn't about you. It was never about you. Megan, she's different. She's not like anyone I've ever met, and I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. I know I hurt you. I know I broke your heart, and I can't undo that. But you have to understand, there are things going on that you don't know about. I can't explain it all. Not yet. But please, don't go looking for me. It's better this way. It's safer for both of us. John. Claire's breath caught in her throat. The letter was brief, but its implications were massive. John hadn't just left her for another woman, he was involved in something far deeper. Something dangerous. Megan, she's different. What did that mean? Was he trying to warn her? Or was he trying to push her away even further? The words "it's safer for both of us" lingered in her mind. Safer? What was he talking about? Was he trying to protect her, or was he simply trying to cut all ties, leaving her to pick up the pieces of a life that no longer existed? Claire folded the letter back up and stuffed it in her pocket. She needed more answers. But where would she find them? The next few days passed in a blur. Claire couldn't shake the feeling that she was getting closer to something, but she couldn't figure out what it was. The information she had gathered about Megan's involvement in criminal activities was growing, but there was still a vast gap in her knowledge about John's role in all of it. He had been hiding something. But what? She couldn't let it go. The sense of unease that had followed her since she had first uncovered the truth about Megan was growing stronger, almost suffocating. Claire's phone buzzed again, this time with an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat. Hello? The voice on the other end was muffled, but Claire could just make out a few words. I know where John is. Her pulse quickened. Who is this? She asked, but there was no response. The line went dead. It was as though someone had thrown a bucket of ice-cold water over her. Her mind raced. Was this a prank? Or was someone out there who knew exactly what was happening? And more importantly, did they have answers? She didn't have time to waste. Claire quickly grabbed her coat and headed out the door. She wasn't going to sit around anymore. If someone knew where John was, she had to find them. She had to get answers. Claire arrived at the address the mysterious caller had provided, a rundown building on the outskirts of town. It didn't look like much, just a crumbling structure in an abandoned part of the city. But as Claire approached the door, she felt a sudden surge of panic. Something wasn't right. But she didn't have a choice. She had come this far. She couldn't stop now. She pushed open the door, the hinges creaking in protest. Inside, the room was dimly lit, and Claire could just make out the figure of a man sitting in the corner. He was tall, with dark hair and a hood pulled low over his face. Claire, he said, his voice raspy. I'm glad you came. Who are you? Claire asked, her voice shaky. How do you know where John is? The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he motioned for her to sit. I know things, he said quietly. Things about John and Megan. Things you won't like. The weight of his words hit Claire like a ton of bricks. She sat down, her hands trembling. Tell me. I need to know. The man leaned forward. John's in trouble. He's not just running from you, he's running from something much bigger. And if you want to find him, you're going to have to follow the trail. But be careful. There are people watching. People who won't stop until they've gotten what they want. Claire's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? The man's eyes darkened. Megan is just the tip of the iceberg. John's in over his head. And if you're not careful, you'll be dragged down with him. Claire's world had become a maze, each turn more confounding than the last. She had spent weeks digging into John and Megan's past, uncovering secrets, lies, and a growing web of deceit that stretched farther than she had ever imagined. But despite all her efforts, she still hadn't found the full truth. Every lead seemed to take her further down a path, only to lead to more questions. Every new piece of information seemed to bring her closer to an answer, but it also pushed her further into a terrifying unknown. The weight of the investigation was beginning to wear on Claire. Each morning she woke up with a feeling of dread in her chest, unsure of what the day would bring, or what she might uncover next. But she couldn't stop herself. She had to know the truth. If not for her, then for the child she was carrying, the child whose future depended on the decisions Claire made now. It had been 2 days since Claire had met Nathan at the cafe. Since then, she had been replaying his words in her mind. You're not ready for the full truth. Don't trust everyone, Claire. His cryptic warning hung in the air, unanswered, unresolved. What had he meant? Had he known something that Claire didn't? Had he been involved in this mess too? Now, Claire sat at her kitchen table again, the glow of her laptop the only light in the room. The silence of the apartment pressed in around her, reminding her of the isolation she had felt since John's departure. But tonight, the silence was different. It was filled with a sense of anticipation, the feeling that she was about to uncover something big, something that would change everything. She had managed to track down one more piece of the puzzle, a document that had eluded her for weeks. It was a financial report related to Megan's real estate firm, one that had been filed under a pseudonym. The document was a trail that had begun with a series of questionable transactions and led directly to a company called Vanguard Solutions. The name had appeared in some of Megan's business dealings, but it had never been fully connected to her until now. Claire clicked open the document, her heart pounding in her chest. The more she read, the more the details began to form a chilling picture. Vanguard Solutions wasn't just a business. It was a front. A front for something much darker, something criminal. Money was being funneled through the company, laundered, and hidden from the authorities. And the more Claire dug, the more she realized that John's name was on some of the transactions. It wasn't just Megan who was involved. John had been in the middle of it all. The revelation hit Claire like a physical blow. She had suspected it for days, but seeing the concrete evidence laid out before her was another thing entirely. Her husband, the man she had once trusted with everything, was implicated in something far worse than she could have imagined. How had she not seen it before? Was he always this person? Or had he become someone else, someone she didn't know, someone who had fallen deeper and deeper into a world of deception and crime? Her fingers trembled as she scrolled down the document, trying to make sense of the figures and names. The more she read, the clearer it became that John had been involved in this scheme for months, maybe even years. He had been working with Megan all along, using their marriage as a cover while he conducted business deals that were anything but legal. It wasn't just an affair. It was a conspiracy. The most disturbing part, however, was the final piece of the document. It was a brief mention of a planned exit strategy. The phrase was vague, but the implications were clear. John and Megan had been planning to disappear together. It all clicked. John hadn't just left her for another woman. He had left because he had been caught in a web that was too big for him to escape. But instead of coming clean, he had chosen to run. He had chosen to abandon Claire, abandon their life, and run away with Megan. Not just to escape her, but to escape the law. Claire closed her laptop with a slam, her breath coming in short, ragged bursts. She felt sick, nauseous with anger, betrayal, and fear. For the first time, she realized the full extent of what John had done. This wasn't just a broken marriage. This wasn't just a man running off with his mistress. This was a man who had been living a double life, one she never knew existed. And now, because of his choices, her life was hanging in the balance. She could feel the walls closing in around her. Every breath she took felt like a struggle. She needed to confront John. She needed to face him and demand answers. But she also knew there was no going back. Whatever she said, whatever she did, she could never undo the truth she had uncovered. John was no longer the man she had married. He was a stranger, a man who had chosen to walk away from everything for the sake of greed, ambition, and the thrill of power. The next morning, Claire woke up with a sense of urgency she had never felt before. The weight of the truth was crushing, but it also fueled her. She had to find John. She had to confront him, even if it meant tearing apart the last remnants of her heart. She got dressed quickly, her mind racing with thoughts of what she would say to him, what she would ask him. But the questions kept coming faster than she could process them. Where was he? What had he been doing? And most importantly, what was he planning to do now? She had a lead. Nathan had mentioned that he knew where John was staying, and Claire had used every ounce of her willpower to resist calling him. But now, it was time. She needed to see him. She needed to hear the truth from his lips. No more searching, no more hiding. She grabbed her phone and dialed Nathan's number. It rang twice before he picked up. Claire, Nathan's voice was guarded, but there was a softness in it that Claire wasn't used to hearing. Have you found what you're looking for? I have, Claire said, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding in her chest. I know what John's been doing. I know about Megan. And now, I need to find him. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Nathan spoke again. I can give you his address. But Claire, you need to be careful. This isn't just about you and John anymore. There's more at stake than you realize. I know, Claire replied, her voice low. But I have to do this. I have to face him. Nathan gave her the address, and Claire immediately hung up. She felt the weight of the decision settle in her chest. There was no turning back now. She had to confront John, to demand answers and to finally end this chapter of her life, no matter how painful it might be. Claire arrived at the address Nathan had given her an hour later. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where people lived behind gated fences and kept to themselves. The house was large, modern, and impersonal, everything John had ever wanted. But Claire didn't care about the house. She didn't care about the life John had built for himself. All she cared about was confronting him. She rang the doorbell, her finger trembling as it pressed the button. The door opened a few moments later, and there he was. John. For a moment, neither of them spoke. John stood in the doorway, his eyes searching Claire's face, his expression unreadable. Claire's heart beat wildly in her chest as she stared at him, waiting for him to say something, anything. But he didn't. Finally, Claire broke the silence. Why, John? Why did you leave me? Why did you do this to me? To us? John's face tightened, and he took a step back, as if trying to distance himself from her. I didn't want this to happen, Claire, he said, his voice low, almost apologetic. But things got out of hand. I didn't know how to fix it. Claire stepped forward, her anger rising. Fix it? You've destroyed everything, John. You've ruined our lives. You've ruined me. John's eyes flickered with something that almost resembled guilt, but it quickly disappeared. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly conflicted. I never wanted to hurt you, Claire. I swear. Then why didn't you come to me? Claire demanded, her voice shaking with emotion. Why didn't you tell me the truth? I couldn't, John whispered, his eyes dropping to the ground. I couldn't tell you. It was too much. It was too much? Claire repeated, incredulous. You think I could have handled you betraying me? Lying to me? Hiding everything from me? Do you have any idea what you've done? John's shoulders sagged as if the weight of her words had struck him for the first time. He was silent for a long time, the air between them thick with tension. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, Claire. But I didn't know how to escape. I was in too deep. And now, I don't know how to fix it. Fix it? Claire echoed, her voice cracking. You can't fix this, John. There's nothing left to fix. For a long moment, they stood there, both of them broken in different ways. Claire realized, in that moment, that there was no going back. No matter what John said, the man she had loved was gone. All that was left was the wreckage of their life together, and the cold truth that neither of them could undo what had been done. The day after Claire confronted John, she sat alone in the apartment, staring at the half-empty coffee cup in her hands, the steam rising in slow spirals, much like her thoughts. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, none of them bringing peace, only more turbulence. The confrontation had been raw, heartbreaking, and, ultimately, unsatisfying. The person she had once known, the man she had loved, stood in front of her and apologized, but the words had fallen short, drowned in the vast sea of betrayal. The apartment was silent, just as it had been for weeks, the loneliness creeping into every corner. But now, the loneliness felt different. It wasn't just the absence of John that weighed on her. It was the crushing realization that everything she thought she knew about her life had been a lie. There had been no happily ever after. There had only been a man who had chosen to turn away, to abandon his family for his own desires and ambitions. Claire wasn't sure how much time had passed when she finally stood up, her legs weak but determined. She had spent the morning agonizing over the conversation with John, replaying every word, every moment. He hadn't had any answers for her. There was no closure, no resolution. It was as if their entire marriage had been swallowed by shadows, leaving only fragments of what once was. But she couldn't let it end like that. She needed answers. And not from John, he had shown her that he was incapable of providing them. She needed answers from herself. Why had she stayed? Why had she trusted him for so long? Why had she believed in something that wasn't real? Claire had spent so much of her life searching for the truth in others, in her relationships, in her marriage, that she had never stopped to question her own role in it all. She had been so wrapped up in the love she thought she deserved that she hadn't seen the cracks in the foundation of her life, the moments where she ignored the signs of a sinking ship. But now, as she looked back, it became clear to her that she, too, had been running away from something deeper, something inside her that she had buried for years. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her reverie. It was a message from Nathan. We need to talk. I have something important to tell you. Her heart skipped a beat. What could Nathan possibly know now? Claire had already confronted John, already pieced together the puzzle. She didn't know what more could be uncovered. But she couldn't ignore the urgency in his message. She quickly typed back. Where? A reply came almost instantly. Meet me at the old warehouse on Oak Street. We'll talk there. It was a strange place for a conversation, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. But it was the only lead she had left, and if Nathan knew something more, she couldn't afford to ignore it. The mystery surrounding John, Megan, and their web of lies had entangled her life enough. It was time to face the rest of the truth, no matter how painful. The warehouse loomed before Claire as she stepped out of her car, its tall, grim silhouette cutting against the dusky sky. The area was desolate, the buildings around it abandoned and decaying. The air smelled of rust and stale wood, the silence oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of traffic far away. Claire walked cautiously, her footsteps echoing off the walls, her heart pounding with every step. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, perhaps a confrontation, or a revelation that would bring everything into sharp focus. When she reached the warehouse door, it creaked open before she could knock. Nathan stood in the doorway, his face shadowed by the dim light coming from inside. There was something different about him, an intensity in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He motioned for her to come in. "It's good to see you, Claire," he said quietly, his voice almost distant. "But this isn't going to be easy." Claire nodded. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to turn back now. "What is it, Nathan? What do you know?" Nathan stepped aside, allowing her to enter. The warehouse was cold, the air thick with the smell of dust and neglect. In the middle of the vast room stood a single table, covered with papers, photographs, and documents. Claire's eyes narrowed as she approached. She could see the familiar faces of John and Megan in the pictures, smiling, carefree, oblivious to the chaos that had been set in motion. Nathan closed the door behind her and walked over to the table, his expression grim. "I've been following this for longer than you know," Nathan said, his voice low. "But what I've uncovered, it's much bigger than I thought." Claire's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "John and Megan," Nathan began but then hesitated, as if weighing his next words carefully. "They've been involved in something far more dangerous than just a simple affair. It's not just money laundering. It's organized crime, Claire. There's a syndicate behind this." Claire's mind reeled. Organized crime? The words felt unreal. This wasn't just betrayal. This was something out of a nightmare. But Nathan's face was serious, and the documents on the table didn't lie. "How do you know this?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan ran a hand through his hair. "Because I've been in this world. I used to be part of it. Before I found out what they were really doing. Before I realized how deep it went. I thought I could get out, but I was wrong. And now, Claire. I'm trying to make things right." Claire felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Nathan had been part of this? Had he known what was going on from the beginning? Had he been helping John and Megan all along? Nathan noticed the look on her face and shook his head. "No. I didn't know, Claire. I swear I didn't know about the extent of their involvement. But once I found out, once I saw the corruption, I had to get out. I had to warn you." Claire's mind struggled to process the information. The man she had trusted, the man who had been so sympathetic toward her, had been part of the very world that had destroyed her life. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of regret, that made her pause. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling. "That John and Megan are part of a crime syndicate? That they've been using me, using all of us, to cover their tracks?" Nathan nodded, his face hardening. "Yes. And it's worse than you think. They've been planning to disappear for good. And not just from you, from everyone. They're going into hiding with the money, Claire. They're going to leave the country. And once they're gone, no one will ever find them." The finality of Nathan's words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Claire felt a wave of dizziness wash over her, her vision narrowing as the reality of it all sank in. This wasn't just about John and Megan's betrayal anymore. This was about her life being caught up in something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. "What can I do?" Claire asked, her voice breaking. "What can I do to stop this?" Nathan stepped closer, his hand resting on the table as he met her gaze. "We can expose them, Claire. We can bring them down. But it won't be easy. It will be dangerous. And you have to be ready for what comes next." Claire felt a surge of determination. She didn't know what would happen if she followed this path, but she knew that she couldn't let John and Megan get away with it. Not after everything they had taken from her. Not after everything they had destroyed. "I'm ready," Claire said, her voice steady. "Let's do it." The months that followed were a blur of planning, danger, and unexpected twists. Claire and Nathan worked together, gathering evidence, contacting authorities, and tracking down every lead. They exposed the criminal syndicate that John and Megan had been working for, and in the end, justice was served. John and Megan were arrested, and their empire of lies and corruption came crashing down. But it wasn't just about vengeance. It was about redemption. Claire had found her strength, not just in confronting the man who had betrayed her, but in rediscovering who she was in the process. She had faced the darkest parts of her past and emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to take control of her future. And in the end, she learned that sometimes, the most unexpected and painful twists in life lead to the most profound transformations.